Splatoon is great, but sometimes I just ask myself, what is the game meant to be? Like, I know the name of the game is a play on the word platoon, but that isn't what I'm talking about. Now, I am someone who is nowhere near qualified to make a video about the hardcore online experience, because as much as I have fun with the game online, I hardly play it. I mean, the only real reason I ever even played ranked was to play League with some people that I knew. However, if there's one thing I can qualify for when making a Splatoon video, it's probably the story mode, because I'm actually 100% of that. Now, just to clarify, this video is coming from the perspective of someone who has only played Splatoon 2, because while I know about Splatoon 1, I never got the chance to play it, since as much as I wanted a Wii U, I never got one. Before I start, I should probably explain the story in minimal detail, because the story itself is not going to be the focus of this video. I guess I should say story spoilers, but it's not really a story-driven game or anything, so it shouldn't really matter, but if you don't like spoilers, I'll put a timestamp on screen right now. The game starts with the player noticing one of the Squid sisters, Marie, from the first Splatoon game, staying on top of a vent hole thing. I don't actually know what these are called for the life of me. When you get close, you will go down, so the player will follow her. In doing so, she will tell you that her cousin Callie has gone missing. So she asks the stalker child to help her in a search, which the player agrees to, and is given the codename Agent 4, Agent 1 and 2 being Callie and Marie, and Agent 3 being the player character from the first game. Honestly, that's really it. Callie just plays the role of damsel in distress who doesn't even recognise she's in trouble as she's being brainwashed with glasses. Because I kid you not, the main antagonist, DJ Octavio, wanted to use her as a feature for his music to boost his Spotify listeners. Then again, shouldn't really be surprised as this is the same company who has made Bowser kidnap Peach for the past 35 years. But I guess in like Splatoon's case, it does make sense given the main focus of Splatoon 2 is the online campaign and not so much the single player experience. It's simple and straight to the point. Story over. Now let's talk about the aesthetic and overall theme of Splatoon, because it's definitely interesting. Splatoon is set in the future where humanity is extinct and the planet is now home to octopus and squid people, which means that we're actually canon to Splatoon, except we're just all dead. Anyway, these human-like creatures called Inklings and Octlings would have a war 100 years before the events of the first game, causing a divide by between the two races. The Inklings would win this war, and as a middle finger towards the Octlings, they would just not be allowed to live on the surface and would live in the underground. Now, this information isn't necessarily spoon-fed to the player, and instead would be explained in the collectible scrolls of the game, which I will be talking about later. The reason I bring all this up is because right off the bat, the theming is very mixed. It has elements of a dystopian setting, but at the same time the issues seem to be in the past, especially when Splatoon 2 takes place, as not only does the game have an Octling as one of the members of the pop music duo Off the Hook, but the play character of the Octo expansion DLC is also an Octoling. In a way, the world of Splatoon seems to mirror our own in the sense that, despite wars that have taken place in the past, people of all races and cultures can live together. This is further supported by the aesthetic of the game. I mean, it's pretty much old news at this point, but Splatoon is inspired by the 90s. I mean, graffiti can be found throughout the game, which is very evocative of the 90s, and a lot of clothing also shares this 90s feel. This world is kind of oxymoronic. It's set in the future where stuff like cat clothes exist, yet the world hasn't really changed, and if anything, history is just simply repeating itself. Even weapons that we are familiar with are still being used, just with ink instead of bullets, but it doesn't even stop at guns because even umbrellas have been turned into weapons. Albeit one of minimal destruction, but a weapon nonetheless. Okay, so let's move on to the gameplay now. Now yeah, of course it's a third person shooter, that much is obvious, but I kind of want to take a more thorough look at the gameplay. For anyone who has never played Splatoon, or at least its story mode, the levels are very linear and often built around a gimmick or the many different weapons. If I was to compare it to something, then I guess they are like longer versions of Super Mario Sunshine Secret levels. You need to reach the end while getting around enemies and obstacles in a pretty narrow space, flowing over a death pit. Actually, when recording the Sunshine footage, it made me notice some more parallels between the two games, such as the Inkjet special weapon being similar to the hover nozzle, how ink in Splatoon and water in Sunshine can actually be used as a faster way of travel, and the graffiti that is scattered around the environments. I mean, yeah, these are probably just coincidences, but it's just still cool to look at these games and find parallels between the two. Speaking of parallels, as I previously mentioned, this game's aesthetic is very 90s driven, but how well does that translate in the story mode? Honestly, pretty well. Signs for the brands in the game are scattered around the place, which confirms that Octlings are sellouts, but also backgrounds reflect their respective level themes. For example, the level Octo Park is a broken down amusement park, and even has stuff like Ferris wheels in the background, which is very reflective of life in the underground. It's very dull and practically falling apart, which goes back to the dystopian elements in the game that are insinuated despite not being in the player's face. Another thing in this level that translates really well is the ride rails. Rail grinding is not a new concept and is one often associated with skateboarding, which peaked during the 20th century. Well, Splatoon would not be the first game to use this. Rail grinding would be explored in games like Tony Hawk Pro Skater and Jet Set Radio, both which take inspiration from the same time period as Splatoon. That being said, rail grinding will later be adapted in platformers with games like Sonic Adventure 2, which Splatoon 2 is more in line with when it comes to how it works, in the sense that you can switch paths and they usually float over a never-ending death pit. Going back to backgrounds for a second, and one thing I thought was cool about the final level is the green and purple lights being shown by the audience. I think both colours complement each other pretty nicely without being opposites on a colour wheel. That being said, the ink from the boss is purple, but the punches are seen shooting out pink. Either way, the colours complement each other pretty well. Purple also makes a lot of sense from a symbolism point of things, as it can be associated with power and royalty, which are both qualities that are relevant to DJ Octavio. Power because not only does he have minions that obey him, but he is quite literally in possession of killing machines. And well, royalty because he's a leader and a figure to the people who stand beside him. Obviously, this is a bit of a stretch, and I am starting to sound like an English teacher talking about Shakespeare, but it can just be fun to speculate and look past what the developers had in mind. Or at least it is for me anyway. These things are just examples of what makes story mode a decent experience. Let's talk about the collectibles that can be found in all levels, which is where I personally got most of my fun from. So I slightly touched on this before, but you can collect these sunken scrolls that expand on the lore and just shines light on life in Necropolis. Let's take scroll number 6 for example. What could have happened to the two embracing? No matter how one loves, there are always different aims. Love can take a great many forms, whatever the era. I get this is meant to touch my heartstrings, but I bought a game, not a £50 love letter. Okay, let's look at scroll number 12. These must be photographs taken by young adult inklings. Are these so-called twinklings trying to convince their peers that their lives are exciting and full of meaning? Or are they trying to convince themselves? Nintendo are quite literally throwing shade at the world we live in. Like, I play games to escape reality, not to be reminded how fake it can be, but honestly this is a good message. Good stuff, Nintendo. Okay, here's the scroll that expands on the lore. When the smoke rises from the 7 rings, pink fish will emerge from the sea, devouring all creatures of the land. The f***? Okay, you know what, I think that's enough of that. But honestly, if you're more interested in these, then don't be lazy and lock them yourself. Or just Google it, I don't really care. And what else is there to talk about? The game has a built-in rhythm game. I think those were popular in the 90s. Oh hey, might as well talk about Splatoon 3. Yeah, that's the thing. So if you live under a rock, Splatoon 3 was announced earlier this year, and despite my very boring reaction to it, I'm actually really excited for this upcoming title. Okay, desert. Splatoon. Yeah, it's Splatoon. Splatoon 3. Splatoon 3? Splatoon 3. It's Splatoon 3. It has to be Splatoon 3. Right? Please don't be another DLC though. Oh, you get a little buddy now. Okay. Show us the gameplay, please. Oh, and are you going to see now? And then it's going to show the game? Maybe? Hopefully? Please? Please be Splatoon 3? I mean, this was speculated, but it's cool to actually see this. Splatoon 3. Yep. Ooh. That's very cool. That's really good. Yes. I wish I could sound more excited right now, but I'm too tired. Crap. I think ending on making a few predictions and hopes for the game is a good way to wrap this video, so I might as well just do that. I think for the sequel, some of the old special weapons like the Kraken from Splatoon on the Wii U should return, as that looks pretty neat and isn't totally out of the question, as Inkzuka from the first game seems to be making a return in Splatoon 3. I also think it's fair to assume that new weapons will be introduced, and I think a pretty interesting weapon could be a spray paint can, because it makes a lot of sense given the graffiti that can be seen in Splatoon. I also hope this story mode is something new, because I don't really know how they will go about making new levels built off gimmicks again. But that being said, they could just introduce a whole ton of new elements. One thing I'm surprised wasn't in Splatoon 2 despite kind of sort of being in Splatoon 1 was split screen multiplayer. Splatoon 2 only features local and online, which is still cool, but I would definitely welcome a split screen that works in the same way as Mario Kart's Team Battle, for example. I do hope they expand on the lore as well and explain more about why a Salmonoid accompanies you, but I think that is a very much given and should be expected. For the final thing I want in Splatoon 3, it's a bit of a controversial one, but honestly I think it'd be very life-changing in the grand scheme of things, and that is to introduce public execution for all dually players, because they are cheap and they know it. Jokes aside, that is all I have to really say when it comes to Splatoon in this video. Might do a video like this for Splatoon 3, depending on how different it is. But if I don't do one in this format, I will definitely do a video playing through that game, which I'm very excited about. If you can, I would like to ask for some constructive feedback on this video, because I am always trying to improve and it generally helps with writing as I'm still learning. Now this is a bit where I tell you to subscribe and like the video, so if you haven't already then maybe consider doing so. I'm not really good at ending these types of videos, which is why this ending may seem a little terribly paced, but I honestly had a lot of fun editing this video. Not editing, writing this video, that's what I meant to say. And I definitely want to do more in the same format in the future. With that being said, I have been BO4, buy my non-existent merch, and bye. There are probably loads of theories online about this, but like, is that actually a canonical reason why like Inklings die to water? Like, they are squids. That makes no sense.